Video, mate. Hi and welcome to another episode of Pixelvalve. Today, as you can see, I'm out and about and I'm here to test this Nikon modified Helios 44-2 camera lens. It's the one we've modified in the previous episode. Hopefully we're going to get some swirly bokeh and some interesting shots, but as you can tell, the conditions aren't brilliant. It's a bit cold and it's a bit dull, so hopefully we'll have some interesting shots. Come with me and let's find out what this lens can do.
My hands are getting cold.
They are cold. Mine
I should bring my gloves.
Yeah, don't cover the camera. Let me...
Okay.
Before I start, I'm going to recap on what has led me here for the benefit of anyone who might be new to the channel. On the screen is this video I made a few years ago when I wanted to modify a Helios 44-2 to fit my Nikon DSLR camera. And the first thing I did was the easiest and simplest way to modify this lens. It's to use spacer rings between two glass elements. It's just like two little washers. It works and it's really easy. This makes the lens focus to infinity, and all you need apart from the spacers is a standard M42 adapter. If you go back to this video, I provide a link in the description where you can download the spacer rings yourself and try it out. While I was at it, I made some extra spacers with funny shaped aperture holes to make some insanely crazy bokeh. And I used the lens like this for a while and got some really interesting shots. But it wasn't long before I noticed something wasn't quite right with the lens. I wasn't able to make that classic Helios swirly bokeh. At first I thought it was because of the funny shaped aperture spacers, probably acting like some kind of stop-down lens. But it should still give me some sort of swirl, I would have thought. The whole character of the lens had changed somehow. It was still sharp, it was still the same contrast, and it had lovely flares. But I noticed the blur and bokeh, they were completely alien, they were completely strange. It was soft and smooth under the conditions that you'd normally expect to find swirl. But of course, what exactly is the swirl? Now, I think the swirl is to do with the shape of the bokeh. Now, the bokeh on the Helios in the centre of the lens is circular. And when we see, or when we notice the swirling happen, what we're seeing is the bokeh balls change shape. Now, we see them changing shape to an elliptical form. And as we get to the corner of the frame, we notice that they increase and become more pronounced. So it becomes tighter and tighter. These circular shapes become tighter and tighter until they become ellipses, and even beyond ellipses to some extent. And I think that's what gives it the swirling effect. It's an illusion, really, and I think the actual background doesn't really swirl, but it's just the feeling. It just brings out a kind of sense of swirl. And because I couldn't get any swirl with these infinity rings, this is why I decided to look into a better way of converting this lens. This is why I created this redesigned part. It's the best way to convert this lens. It allows Nikon users to use the Helios natively as if it was factory made for the F-mount. And it switches out the M42 screw for the Nikon F-mount bayonet, and has these things on the side that helps it attach to the faceplate of the Nikon. Now, I've printed a prototype. This is the prototype. As you can see here, it's a little bit rough, but that's what prototypes are like. This is just designed for testing. It's a 3D print made with PLA filament. It's rough, but it's great for rapid prototyping. All I've got to do now is go out and test this thing under various conditions. It is overcast, it's still winter, it's very cold, so the conditions aren't great, but hopefully I can still induce some of that swirling bokeh. But before I get into it, I took this quick shot with my mobile phone just to show the difference in colour, blur and overall composition. Notice how sharp it is everywhere using the mobile phone. I'm focusing in on this teasel plant. It's about a metre in front of me, and the trees in the distance are about 30 metres away. The conditions aren't great, they're not ideal, but I do expect the juxtaposition between the dark trees and the bright sky will be just enough to form those elusive bokeh balls that we're looking for. And here we are, using the modified Helios lens on the Nikon DSLR. It's subjective, I know, but I think there is swirl here. I can definitely see the bokeh balls change from circular in the centre of the image, moving into an increasingly tighter elliptical shape as we get to the border of the frame, especially in the corners, and that's exactly what I'd hoped to see. I'm going to shoot everything wide open at f2 and keep it at 100 ISO. The colour profile is just standard Nikon, which is a bit flat. I've got it on auto white balance, and the only thing I've really done to change this is the levels, just to compensate for how flat the image was. So this is the very first picture, and you can immediately see the differences from the previous images I took with the spacer rings. Both images are just as sharp, so it hasn't affected the image quality that way. What we're looking at now is an image made using the prototype Pixelvalve adapter, and I was focused onto the furthest teasel. Overall, it's quite a low contrast lens that is naturally a little bit soft. It does have a tendency to produce that glowing aura around bright objects. The stem on this teasel plant is quite bright, and I feel that it's more than just out of focus, it's actually glowing. This is expected shooting wide open, I know, but the Helios has this character about it, and it's made worse by my scratched up lens. I've actually heard in the past that people would deliberately scratch up these old lenses for artistic effect, but I don't know how true that is. It sounds horrible. I first used the Helios about 30 years ago, and I didn't really like it because it always gave me blurry shots. I know I said in the past that I'm still learning with photography, but what I really meant was that I'm fairly new to digital photography, because in the past I used SLR cameras and would develop my own black and white film quite a lot. Now that we've seen the first shot and examined it a bit, let's see some more and look into this further. There's not a lot of swirl going on in this shot, and that's because the bokeh balls need to be smaller. If the background was further away, it would be a better effect. The Helios is a lovely lens, but at 58mm I find it's just a little bit long of a focal length on the crop frame. It's sometimes difficult to stand far enough back from the subject to get the right size of small bokeh balls. But even when the conditions aren't ideal like this, we can still feel that vague sense of swirl using this Pixelvalve adapter. And even like this, when there are big bokeh balls and the effect isn't so pronounced, I think I can still see swirl in the corners. These shots don't have any colour grading or LUTs applied. All I've done is change the levels, which just normalises the contrast and white balance. I do it manually, so it's not like applying an auto level filter. I cut the trailing ends off the histogram. The original is on the right side. It's the excessive dark or light areas that cause the washed out effect. But there is plenty of dynamic range to bring it all back. The natural colour rendition of the Helios isn't vivid. I find it very flat, but I like how it can bring out the low, deep purple tones out of the really dark black areas. It almost looks like colorized film sometimes. Sure, the swirling background is one of the most renowned features of the Helios, but there is a lot more to the lens than this. I think the purple, the dark purple within the dark areas, is due to flaring. I can see much less swirl going on in this image of the leaf. It's very pastel tone, perhaps a more realistic colour, while the leaf itself is crisp and sharp in the centre. I think you can see what I mean about the deep purple. These trees were brown when I shot this. It was a dull day and it was dark in the woods, but the darkness is not caused by the shadow, it's caused by the backlight exposure, because the iris is wide open. It's the contrast. Look at the bright wood towards the foreground of this picture, on the fallen tree, and compare it to the dark hole inside the tree. The detail is available in both areas. We can go darker and lighter before the detail is completely lost. Okay, a lot of this has to do with the camera and post-processing rather than the lens, but generally the image seems naturally desaturated. This is the same tree stump, but notice the background and how it seems to swirl even though it's quite close. I'm about 1 metre away from the log, and that grass background is only about 3 metres at the most. Getting down low on the ground for this shot, I don't know what these small flowers are, but I can't see any swirl. None. There is blur, but with the lack of bokeh balls, we don't get swirl. Swirl seems to depend on these bokeh balls. It's quite a sharp lens, even though my first impression is to think that it was soft. It's quite surprising when you correct the levels and find the clarity improves so much. When I'm looking through the viewfinder, it looks like I need to wipe the lens. It's like there's haze or something there. It's foggy and difficult to focus sharply. Luckily, Nikon has that green dot in the eyepiece. So you can see, digitally zoomed in, it's sharp enough. The low contrast and pale colour can be shifted for vibrance under the right conditions, but it's difficult to achieve while shooting wide open. A good angle and a hand over the top of the lens to shade the light can sometimes alter the contrast. A different angle, more light, no shade, some big bokeh balls, and a bit of swirl. The centre of the lens is the sharpest, but it's not bad around the sides either. But it's the blur and colour that we want to look at. There is bokeh balls here, but there's no swirl. This bush has a painted brushstroke type feeling to it. There was a lot of movement and a bit of a breeze, but because the iris was wide open, I was using quite a fast shutter speed. The Helios does have chromatic aberration, but it doesn't have the horrible purple fringing of some other lenses. One of the things I really like about the Helios is how it flares. If we just tip the lens into some direct light, it can produce some amazing prismatic effects. What about the standard adapters? You know, those adapters that already exist. The ones you can buy from eBay, Amazon and everywhere else. They're the simple M42 to F-mount screw-on adapters. These adapters. This one is a simple metal adapter. It's extremely cheap. And this other adapter is a bit more expensive because it has its own glass element, although it's still quite cheap. They both adapt M42 lenses to fit the Nikon F-mount. They both do the same job, so why would anyone need to make another adapter when these already exist and are readily available? What I'm going to do next, to be fair and complete, is to take some photos using the already available adapters. I'm going to go back to the teasel shot and recreate it using these adapters. We've already seen the teasel photo made with the Pixelvalve adapter, so now it might be a good idea to compare how the Pixelvalve adapter stands up to these existing adapters. To do this, I've reverted my Helios back to the original M42 mount. And when I screw on the standard metal adapter, you can see how the lens would have fitted onto the camera, and how the adapter sits between the camera and the lens. This extra space that is occupied by the lens, by the adapter I mean, is enough to prevent you from being able to focus to infinity. The adapter makes the lens sit even further away from the camera than what was originally intended, and you can only focus up to a few feet away using this adapter. This is why some adapters include a glass element like this one. This adapter also fits into the space between the camera and the lens, but the distance it occupies is negated by the extra glass element. In other words, it refocuses the image so we can achieve infinity focus. This works sometimes, but it can add more problems into the mix. It just depends on the lens you happen to be using. Every lens is different, and the first thing you might notice is the Helios's rear lens element needs to move back and forth like they all do. It's what happens as we focus in and out, and this motion will be limited by the adapter because it won't be able to travel beyond this. So this rear element on the Helios lens will eventually hit the adapter's glass element before it can achieve infinity focus, which means you won't be able to focus to infinity even if you do go ahead and buy this slightly more expensive glass adapter. This glass element works fine on a Carl's Ice because the rear element doesn't quite go far enough, but it doesn't work on the Helios, which is quite disappointing. I have a random M42 lens close to hand on my desk. It's an auto Chinon 55mm. Its rear element doesn't protrude very far beyond the back of the lens, and I'm interested to know if this will focus to infinity using this glass adapter. The Chinon lens might get a conversion one day, I don't know yet. It looks like it is possible, but it could be a pain to do. It's a bit tricky to screw on this adapter while I'm filming, because I tend to look through the viewfinder on the camera rather than over the camera and to what my hands are doing, so it's a little bit disorientating sometimes. There's nothing wrong with the adapter or the lens, it's just the way I'm doing it. But we can tell without using it on the camera. We just need to see the focus wheel move all the way to the infinity while it's on the lens. So as you can see here, will it reach infinity? Yes, it does. So we can tell that this lens will be fine. The other problems that we might get with adapters like these is that they introduce focal length changes and aperture changes. They make the lens a little bit longer and allow in a bit less light. Let's compare the images from each adapter. I've taken 3 shots at the same settings from the same distance away, the only difference being each photo is using the adapter, the different adapter. The first shot was taken with the glass adapter. I know it's not much to look at, it was an afterthought late in the day, and I didn't account for the little daylight fading through the windows as it got dark, so I've messed it up a little bit. But what you should notice is the focal length change between each shot. Notice when it changes from the glass element to the metal adapter, the scene seems to jump back a little amount, and it slightly lightens up too. Now, this is the Pixelvalve adapter. Did you notice how they jumped back and seemed to change the brightness? Well, the Pixelvalve adapter got darker instead of lighter. It should have got lighter instead of darker, but because the daylight had completely gone by the time I took the shot, it made the image a bit dark. So I messed it up. So what I've done, I've laid them out side by side so you can see the differences. And you can see the focal length does change. The glass element is fairly close, the metal further back, and of course the Pixelvalve adapter, because it isn't really an adapter, it's giving you the original frame size. You can see the top of the the top of the oil lamp there. To summarise, the existing adapters will only partially work. They have limits, and sometimes they make the image quality a lot worse, although occasionally you might find the odd lens that can use the glass adapter without any kind of issues. I'm going to compare the adapters. I'm going to revisit that teasel scene. And you might be wondering if infinity is even necessary to achieve swirl, since we're only going to be using the lenses to focus fairly close up. I suppose we're going to find out. Let's start with the standard metal adapter. I'm going out to photograph this thing, even though the conditions aren't exactly the same as the original shoot. There's a lot more sun out today. It's a much nicer day. It shouldn't have a huge effect on the image, but it might help produce better bokeh between the trees, because there might be better contrast, there might be more specular highlights. I've taken this first shot to show what the focus looks like at infinity. The first shot is at my focusing extent, which is on the plain metal adapter. I can't focus any further away. I'm standing about 1.5 meters away from the teasel. This is it, my infinity focus. I've set the lens to infinity and I've literally moved the camera into the sharp zone. Turning around, I shoot the exact same scene as I did the original time. The only difference is the lighting and the adapter is different. The first thing I notice is the lack of swirl, but the bokeh balls are present and become elliptical towards the edge of the frame. The bokeh balls are a little bit different. They look more like soap bubble bokeh with their lighter outer rim. The image is sharp overall, and the only real technical difference between this and the Pixelvalve adapter is the whole lens has been shifted about 2 millimeters further away from the sensor on this particular adapter. I took several shots to try and squeeze something out of this, because I'd be surprised if I can't make the swirl work, since the adapter really doesn't do a lot. You could even probably get similar results by holding the lens against the body of the camera by hand. So, using the standard cheap metal adapter, you could take some portraits. It does have the ability to take a nice shot, but for some reason I'm struggling to get swirl. I think my imagination sometimes makes me think there is swirl in this, but I don't think it's really there. Let me know what you think, because I've been staring at these things for a long time. Next in line, we have this glass element adapter. There are various kinds of this type made by different brands, so my suspicion is that the quality of the glass elements might be different depending on each brand, so your mileage might vary. I've only ever used this one, so I can't really say any more, but let me know what your experience was like if you've used one of these. So the same again, shooting the same scene but from behind, so I can show you the infinity focus ability of the adapter. As we've already seen, the Helios lens does hit the adapter, which prevents it from moving any further back. And as a result of this, the furthest we can focus is something similar to the other simple standard metal adapter. So on the Helios dial, I can't actually turn it all the way to infinity. So at that point, I leave it and physically move the camera to its focus point. Looking back at the photo, I noticed that it's just a little bit soft, and I remember the other photo of the kerosene lamp. That was also a little bit soft. Overall, I think I can focus a little bit further with the glass element, further than the metal one, but it seems to be just a little bit worse quality with this glass element. The first thing I notice about this image is how soft it is. When I shot the photo, I used the green dot in my viewfinder to get a focus indicator. I didn't eyeball it. The next thing I notice is this amazing bokeh. I really like the bubble bokeh that fills the whole background here. The bokeh shape starts off circular, as you'd expect, and then becomes a kind of half elliptical shape. It's not quite the same as the original, and we're missing the all-important swirling background. It just isn't happening. I don't know why the image is so soft. It looks out of focus. Every shot so far looks the same. I'm struggling to get a sharp image with this adapter. I've tried this adapter briefly on the Tazar, and it seems sharp enough. I'll experiment a bit more with this adapter, and I hope at some point I'll be able to make some videos comparing the Pixelvalve Tazar to a glass adapted Tazar, but that's something down the pipeline. This image so far seems to be the sharpest. I'm not sure why it's so soft usually. I did look at the adapter to make sure, and make double sure, that there's no fingerprints, grease or dirt or anything on that element, but it was as clean as a whistle. The flares do seem different as well. The prismatic effect doesn't seem to be as sharp, not as pronounced, although it could be other factors at play there, like distance and angle, as I wasn't really deliberately trying to get this to flare, unlike the time when I used the Pixelvalve adapter. It's definitely a different effect. So we've reached the end of the show, and to conclude, it would be good to get your opinion on this as well. But what I think we can say about using the Helios on the Nikon F-mount cameras so far is that we have 4 options. So the 4 options are: number 1, the infinity rings; number 2, the standard adapter; number 3, the glass adapter; and number 4, the Pixelvalve adapter. Now, if I had to put this into order of best to worst, I would say probably, in my opinion, the best option is the Pixelvalve adapter because it fixes all the issues. It allows the lens to work exactly as originally intended. It gives the most authentic experience, although it is the hardest to install because it involves removing some screws and replacing the part. The second best was the infinity rings because it was free. It's a free solution that allows the lens to be used fully, and it's extremely easy to do. And then I would say the standard metal adapter was probably better than the glass adapter because it didn't blur the image. The standard adapters I looked at only represent 2 out of probably a few different versions. It's possible that other brands and versions could perform differently. It's possible that your experience could be better or worse than mine, but my feeling is you can never get better than something that recreates the original conditions. My feeling is that all adapters will have some kind of terrible trade-off because they're adapting something to fit something else, and this is the real difference with the Pixelvalve. It's not really an adapter. It doesn't adapt anything. It fully converts the parts by replacing other parts. And that's it. The end of the show, with everything covered most probably. But if there's anything that I've missed, or anything you can add, then please hit the comments. Also, it would be great if you could subscribe, as it would really help the channel grow. I hope this has been useful to you, and I hope I didn't make things too long and boring. Let me know how your experiences went with the Helios, and if there are any other adapters or any gear out there that I might have missed or didn't know about. So, thanks for watching, thanks for sticking along with this, and we'll see you again hopefully in the next video. Bye for now.
Like and subscribe to Pixelvalve for 10 million 100 subscribers.